I learned the truth on the night my wife died, when the hospice nurse pulled a tin box from her bag and told me I had a daughter whose eyes were the exact blue of the girl I thought had betrayed me. The letter that broke my heart in 1978 was a lie. And the lie came from a place I never saw coming. Hey folks, welcome back to After Her Lies. I am Hank Mercer, and before I tell you this one, I need to say something I say every time, because it matters. I looked at the little dashboard, and it says 96 of you who watch these videos are not subscribed. That number knocks the wind out of an old man. It makes me sad. I will not pretend it does not. So please, if you like these stories, hit subscribe, tap the bell, give the video a like, and leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from or what part of the story put a thumb right on your heart. I read them all. Now settle in, because this is the one I have been circling around for years. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. My father worked nights at the paper mill and came home with the smell of pulp blooming off his jacket. My mother hummed while she ironed. We were not poor in the kind of way that makes a movie, but money pulled at us like a tide. I was a skinny kid with quick hands and a temper I tried to keep in a pocket. The summer I turned 20, 1978, the county fair set up on the gravel lot by the river. I put on my good jeans and a belt with a buckle that was too big and found myself walking under strings of yellow bulbs and the smell of fried dough. A band that could not keep time played Fleetwood Mac on a plywood stage. I still remember the sparkle of the Ferris wheel moving against a purple sky. There is something about being 20 at a fair that feels like someone opened a door in the world. I met her at the lemonade stand. Her name was June Ellison. She had a white ribbon in her hair and freckles across her nose like a constellation you would never find in a book. She said she was starting nursing school in the fall. I told her I was starting work stringing lines for Dayton Power and Light, climbing poles and sweating out there where the cicadas make their long saw song. We walked the whole fair and talked until our voices went soft. She was gentler than I was, and braver. She made me brave. Do not laugh, but I have never been as brave as that first time I asked her to ride the Ferris wheel. I thought my heart would come up through my throat. We rode to the top, and the wheel stopped in one of those pauses that is louder than any sound. The whole town was spread under us. When the car rocked, I grabbed the bar with both hands, and she reached over and put her hand on my wrist and said, "Hank, look." So I looked. Not for long, but long enough to see what the world looked like from a place I did not think I could go. That is a thing I learned with June. How to look. We spent the rest of that summer driving slow back roads and sitting on her mother's porch. Her mother's name was Carol, and she looked at me like a cold wind. She wore 2 gold rings and kept them shining. June's father had left when she was just into high school, and Carol had a hardness like a shell. She had opinions about me. Those opinions made their way to my ears. Wrong side of town. That boy's father drinks. He will drag you down. That kind of talk. I kept my shoulders back anyway. The last night of August, we sat on the hood of my Pontiac, under the lights of the old baseball field. No one played there anymore. Moths chased themselves around the lamps. June leaned back, hands behind her, hair down her back like a waterfall, and told me she had saved $200 in tips. We could take the Greyhound to Nashville that weekend. get married by a preacher friend of her aunt. She had it all planned. She was bold like that. She wanted to start a life and send a postcard that simply said, "We did it." We kissed and we laughed, and we looked out at nothing and saw everything. We picked Saturday morning. I did not sleep all week. I tied and retied my tie in the mirror. I did my best to keep it all quiet in the house. My father had a way of hearing that did not depend on ears. That morning I left a note on my mother's kitchen table that said, "I love you. I will come back a husband." I folded it in half and slid it under the salt shaker. Then the letter arrived. It got to me on Friday night. The envelope was cream and stiff, like it had been waiting on some rich man's desk. It had a stamp with a red tulip. My name was written in June's small, neat hand. It smelled faintly of her. That part undid me even before I pulled the paper out. The letter inside was short. "Hank, do not come. I made a mistake with someone else. I am late, and it is not yours. I am sorry. Do not call. Do not come by the house. Please do not make this harder. Forget me. 4 sentences can be a wrecking ball." I sat on the edge of my bed with that paper in my hands and heard something inside me tear. When my father came in from the porch and saw me sitting there, he raised his chin in that way he had, like he was choosing between 3 things he could say and picked none. He left me to it. I did not go to the Greyhound. I went to work the next morning and climbed a pole off Turner Road and put my head down and let the creosote take over the air. I did not call June. I did not go by the Ellison house. I obeyed the letter. I was 20, and I told myself that obeying was strength. I learned later how wrong that was. But that morning I felt like obedience was the only thing that could keep the blood in my veins. You have heard me talk about mistakes on this channel. The first big one I ever made was treating pain like a reason to hurry. In the fall, I started chasing any shift I could get. I bought a second-hand couch from a closed motel and hauled it up to a little apartment above a laundromat. I moved through the days like someone was pushing me from behind. Linda Cartwright worked at the city school. She had a voice that could turn a kid's bad day around. She was 2 years older than me and had shoulders that looked like they had held the world up and decided to keep doing it. She came to a church picnic with a friend, and we ended up sitting at the edge of a soccer field, watching a bunch of kids kick a ball that had no air in it. She made me laugh. We went for coffee, and she asked about my work and did not flinch when I told her about climbing poles in lightning storms. The next spring, I asked her to marry me on a wooden bridge out by Inglewood Reserve, and she said yes with both hands on my cheeks. When I told my mother, she hugged me so tight my ribs complained. My father shook my hand and put an extra $10 bill in my palm. I noticed the way he looked at Linda like a thing had been set right that he had not known how to fix. I loved her. I did not choose her to fill the shape of someone else. I need to say that because a man cannot tell his story if he does not give honor where it is due. We had 2 kids, Evan and Sarah. I worked storms and ice and heat. I went up poles and down in holes. I learned to pack a thermos the right way so the coffee would be hot without scald. We saved enough to buy a little house at the edge of town with a maple tree that turned so red in October, it made people slow down when they drove by. We had good years. Linda had a way of laughing that would make me realize I was safe. You think this is the whole story. It is not. Because grief is patient. It will wait on the porch while your life goes by inside and the kids learn to ride bikes. It will ring the bell when it knows you are ready, and sometimes it is not for 10 years. Sometimes 20. I saw June once. It was the spring of 1981. I was driving the work truck down 3rd Street, and a woman stepped off the curb with a bag of groceries. She looked up, and I felt the shift in the air that happens when a storm comes in. It was her. I tapped the horn by accident, and she froze and then kept going. It was a red light. I could have opened the door and called her name. I could have run after her and not looked back. I could have made a scene and had it written up in the paper. I did none of that. I kept my hand on the wheel, and the light turned green, and I drove back into the life I had chosen. When I got home that day, Linda was sitting on the steps painting her toenails, and the sight of her moved me so strongly and so exactly that I ended up sitting down beside her and crying like the man I was. She put the cap back on the polish and put her hand on the back of my neck. She did not ask. She knew that sometimes the question is worse than the answer. The kids grew. Sarah had a pitch that made coaches smile with their whole faces. Evan built a go-kart from scrap and won a ribbon because everyone respects nerve. I stopped drinking on Sundays, and then I stopped completely. I wish I could tell you I stopped for noble reasons. I stopped because one night Evan sat next to me and moved my beer can to the coffee table without saying a word. I looked at his hand, and I thought about my father's hand, and I made a decision. There are days a man lives that will not fit inside a story because they are too quiet, but they are the hinge that turns him. That was one. When I hit 60, I retired. My knees had opinions about ladders. The kids insisted I should not simply sit on the porch and yell at squirrels. Evan set me up with a little camera and a ring light, and After Her Lies was born. That name came out of a joke that was not a joke. The joke was that I had a lot of stories that started with a woman and a lie. The truth was that I had never made peace with the letter. I sat at my kitchen table and told little stories about work and the town, and the time I accidentally turned the love seat upside down on the roof of the Pontiac and drove it through town like a turtle. People watched. I made 4 videos, and then 20, and then 100. A few of you have been here since the first one. I see your names, and I feel like I know your dogs. Then Linda got sick. The cough started in February and lingered. The doctor said antibiotics, and we waited. By April it was worse. They found it. It had a name that sounded like a road you do not want to take. We sat in a parking lot that smelled like hot tar and cried in the way of people who are trying not to scare each other. I would have given everything I owned to steal what was happening. There are places in hospitals where hope looks like a paper cup. We stood in those places. We held each other up. When we reached the last part, a hospice nurse started coming to the house. Her name was Emily. She was in her 30s. She had a calm that made the air settle. The first day she came up the path in her blue cardigan, I felt something turn over inside me. I did not know why at first. Then she stepped into the kitchen light, and I knew. It was the eyes. June's eyes. Blue with that green shift at the edge. There are not many people with eyes like that. I had spent years trying not to describe them in my head. Now they were standing at my sink, looking at my wife with kindness. Emily took care of Linda like she was taking care of a memory she wanted the world to keep. She showed me how to lift without hurting my back. She taught me a way to rub lotion into Linda's hands that eased that restless ache. She sat with me when the house slept and the refrigerator hummed like a distant engine. We talked about nothing and everything, and I did not ask her the question my whole body wanted to ask, because I'm not a man who turns the last chapter into a mess out of his own need. One afternoon, while Linda napped, Emily stood by the window and said, "Hank, do you believe in patterns?" I said I believed in power lines and lightning find each other. She smiled and looked down at her watch and said, "That is an answer I like." She opened her bag and pulled out a tin box the size of a sandwich. It had a bird stamped on the lid. She set it on the table between us. She took a breath in the way a person does when their heart is on one side of a river and their feet on the other. She said, "My mother's name was June Ellison. She told me to find you." I could not speak. I could not move. I sat there like a man who has been told a train he stepped off of years ago has circled the world and returned to the station. Emily opened the box. Inside were letters tied with a white shoestring and a Polaroid that had gone soft around the edges. The picture was of me and June under the county fair lights. My arm was around her, and I looked like I had won a prize that would never break or rust. On the back of the picture, in June's neat hand, it said, "The night he looked." I held that picture so gently I could have been holding a bird. Emily told me the rest. The letter in 1978 was written by June. Yes, but not the way I thought. Carol, her mother, had sat at the table with June's hands under hers. She had said things about me, money, drinking, work that kills men young. She had threatened to pull June out of nursing school and send her to an aunt in Florida if she did not break with me. She put the words in June's mouth. June wrote them down on paper. She walked the envelope to the mailbox and cried all the way back to the house. Then she packed a bag. 2 weeks later, when the house was quiet, she wrote me another letter telling me everything. She walked that second envelope to the post office and put a stamp on it. It never got to me. It was given to someone who said he would deliver it by hand. That someone burned it in his driveway because he loved her too, and because love and weakness are cousins. I felt the world slip sideways. I knew immediately who. Tommy Rourke. He was my friend from school, and we had run together like colts. He had been around that summer, leaning against his truck while June and I laughed on her porch. He had teased me, and I had smiled, and he had smiled too hard back. He had that letter in his hand, and he put a match to it. Emily said June kept the Polaroid and 3 letters for me in that box. She kept them through years and through cities. She had not married. She had had 1 baby. Emily, my daughter. She told Emily my name when she was 16. She said I was good. She said I had a laugh like a porch screen door and a way of making small things feel like church. She told Emily she had written me again and again in her head. Then she told her to find me when a certain star showed up. That is how she put it. When the star shows up, find him. You will know the star when you see it, because it will carry the shape of his voice. The star, as it turned out, was this channel. Emily found after her lies while scrolling in the car on a night she could not sleep. There I was, telling a story about a ladder and a raccoon. She recognized my wrists. She recognized the way I said the word blue. She watched 10 videos, and then all of them. She did not write me. She waited. Then she learned Linda was ill, because she is a hospice nurse in this county, and these things move in circles. She volunteered to take the case. She put the tin box in her bag and waited for a quiet afternoon. Linda woke up, and we told her together. She took my hand, and she took Emily's, and she said, "Of course." She said it like the word had been sitting in the room waiting for its turn. Then she said something that shook me the rest of the way. She said, "Hank, I knew." She said it as soft as rain. She had known about June since that day in 1981 when she found me crying by the steps. She had never asked. She had written June a letter herself years after that, when she found an old newspaper clipping about a nurse named Ellison receiving an award in Cincinnati. She had written to the hospital. She had told June that I was well and that I was loved, and that if June ever needed to say something to me, she should keep it safe until the time was right. She had signed it in the way she signs things when she is being gentle, with her first name and a little flourish. June never answered that letter, but she told Emily to find me after Linda was gone, because she did not want to walk into the middle of our life and turn it into something harder than it had to be. Linda squeezed my fingers and said, "Even love needs room to be good." 2 nights later, my wife died while the maple outside shifted in the wind. We held her and we told her she had been brave, and the house became a place that remembers. I moved through the funeral like a man walking down to the water in his socks. After the casseroles came and the quiet came, and my days were a kind of wide, flat field. Emily kept showing up. She changed the sheets with me and watered the basil and kept the plants alive. We ate sandwiches over the sink. I kept catching myself looking for Linda's shadow, and then seeing Emily standing there with June's eyes, and feeling like time had folded so that the beginning and the end touched hands. We mailed in the DNA kits, because sometimes a thing needs a test to make it real for the world, even when your bones already know it. When the result came back, I sat on the porch with my phone in my hand and cried with my face all scrunched up like a boy. I called Emily, and she answered, and I said, "Hello, kiddo," and she said, "Hello, Dad." I had not realized how heavy the word Dad could be until it rose up out of a voice I recognized before I had heard it. I thought hard about whether to tell the rest of this, but you have been with me a long time, and I owe you the whole road, not just the parts that drive nice. I drove to Tommy Rourke's house. He lives in a single story over by the old foundry with a chain-link fence out front and a flag that has been out in weather too long. The yard looked tired. So did he. His hair had gone white at the edges, and his belly had turned into the kind of thing you hide behind. He saw me through the screen door and said my name, like he had been keeping it under his tongue like a bit of candy he had been saving. He did not ask me in. He came out and we stood on the cracked walkway. I told him that I knew. He closed his eyes. Then he told me that he had not slept a full night in years. He had loved June like a cliff loves the river it cannot climb. He told me about the second letter. He held it in his hand, he said, and he thought about giving it to me, and he thought about keeping it. And he set it on the hood of his truck and set fire to it with a cigarette. He watched the flame take the edge and push out. He said he had looked for a reason to go back for 20 years and found none. Then he said he was sorry. He said it once, and then he said it again, and I watched his face. I am not a saint. I did not forgive him right there with the sky opening. I said, "You took something from me you had no right to touch," and my voice came out like gravel. He nodded and he said he knew, and the two of us, old men with lives behind us and not enough in front, stood there and let it exist between us. A robin landed on the fence. The light shifted. I left without a handshake. That night I dreamed my house was on fire, and I carried 2 photographs in my arms like babies. There are letters in that tin box I still cannot read in one sitting. June wrote about nursing night shifts and patients who wake up calling for their mothers. She wrote about learning to cook on a hot plate and how eggs can be a meal if you let them. She wrote about me. She described a look I had on my face that she had recognized back then and never found on anyone else. She said that when she had Emily, she held that baby and counted her fingers and whispered my name, not because she wanted to make me a ghost in their house, but because she wanted to keep that part of herself alive. She wrote that she loved Linda in the way a woman loves another woman who keeps the world gentle for a man they both want to see whole. She wrote that she would not come find me while Linda was living because she believed that love should add and not subtract. She wrote that she would come find me at the end and give me the box and say, "This is not a second chance at being 20. It is a first chance at telling the truth." June died 3 years before Linda. A quiet thing in the night. Emily found her on the floor with a hand on her chest and a look on her face like she was listening. There are moments I try not to see in my head, because there is nothing I can do about them now. When I do see them, I say her name out loud, June. It does something to the hurt, giving it a sound. After the first fog lifted, Emily and I drove to Cincinnati, where June is buried under a maple that looks like the one in my yard on purpose. Emily held my elbow because she knew the ground would tilt under me. I stood there with my hand on the stone. I told her I was sorry I had obeyed the worst letter, that I had not come to the house to ask, that I had let fear dress up as respect. I told her Linda loved her. I told her that her daughter had a voice that could stop a room. I told her she would have liked after her lies, because I do not always tell it right, but I always tell it true. Emily put the Polaroid at the base of the stone and weighted it with a flat river rock. I watched the wind move through the leaves. The first video I made, after all this, I sat at the kitchen table and started to talk, and then I stopped because I realized the name of this channel had never been fair. It was never after her lies. It was after our lies. After my lie about being fine. After Carol's lie about what a poor boy could become. After Tommy's lie to himself that he needed to burn what he could not have in order to live. After the lie that love has to look like a straight road or it is not worth walking. The day the DNA result came in, Emily took me to a diner off Route 4 that has not changed since the fryers were put in. We got eggs and bacon, and the waitress brought our food without writing it down. Emily asked about the time I dropped a wrench from the top of a pole and had to apologize to a mailbox. I told her, and she laughed and put her head back. That laugh reached somewhere in me I did not know had been waiting. When the waitress brought the check, she called us you two, and I went out to the truck and sat there with my hands on the wheel and realized that I had been holding my breath for 47 years. Evan and Sarah took the news in the way of people who were raised by a mother who knew when to soften and when to stand. Evan hugged his sister so hard she squeaked. Sarah braided Emily's hair like she had been ready to do it since she learned how. We sat in my living room, passing plates and stories. Linda's framed picture on the piano looked on like a lighthouse. I keep telling you this part because it matters. People can hold more love than they are told they can. people can take the truth and tuck it into the folds of their lives and make room at the table. That is a thing worth saying because this world uses up too many words on the ways we are broken and not enough on the ways we can mend. I went to see Carol, June's mother. She lives now in a small apartment with carpet that has the pattern of a garden. She answered the door with a white cardigan pulled around her like the shell I told you about all those years ago. She has shrunk. Age does that to a person. It takes the corners off. I had not seen her since I was 20. I used to imagine I would say big things to her when the day came, but when I stood in front of her on that gray afternoon, I said, "Hello, Carol," and I took off my hat because my mother did not raise a fool. She did not call me Hank. She called me Henry, the way school forms do. She invited me in. We sat, and I told her what I had come to tell her, without pointing with my voice. I told her that the letter had done what she wanted it to do, and that it had also done things none of us knew. I told her that I had ended up with a life that made a kind of rough and perfect sense, and that I was grateful for what I had, and that I was sad for what I lost, and that both those things were true at the same time. She looked down at her hands and rubbed the knuckles and said, "I thought I was saving her." Then she looked up and the shell cracked, and I saw the girl she had been, and she said, "I am sorry." I nodded and said, "Thank you," and stood up, and the day leaned a little toward light. After that, I started telling stories differently. I stopped rushing. I left the stumbles in sometimes. When I say subscribe, I mean come back and sit at this kitchen table with me while I pour the truth out of an old thermos and do my best to get the measure right. When I ask you to comment, I am asking you to bring your story and set it down next to mine, like a piece of a puzzle no one has the picture for yet. When I ask for a like, it is not because I think there is a scoreboard that matters more than a life lived well. It is because sometimes pushing a little heart on a screen reminds a person that they have one. I took the tin box and put it in the drawer next to my old pocket knife and my father's lighter. Every so often, I take it out and sit with it. I touch the letters and the Polaroid. I remember the smell of fried dough and the tune of the band missing half the notes. I remember the weight of my first tool belt and the hum that runs through a line when you open the breaker. I remember the way June said my name and the way Linda said it, each of them laying it down in a different key. I remember the way Emily says Dad, almost shy and then not. All those sounds make a chord that I think is called rescue. If you are young and you are listening, this old man wants to tell you something he learned too slow. Do not let fear dress up as good manners. If something feels wrong in your bones, go to the house and knock on the door and ask. Do not let anyone stand between you and the truth with their palm up like a traffic cop. If you are older, do not tell yourself the story cannot change because the paint is dry. Someone will hand you a tin box at the end of your life, and it will be full of the pieces you thought you had lost for good. Make room. People say to me, "Hank, do you regret?" I do and I do not. I regret the time I spent believing a small, cruel version of myself, the one someone else wrote down and signed in my name. I do not regret the life I built in the wreckage of that mistake, because that life held my children and the hand of a woman who kept me kind. The truth is that the story is bigger than any one of us, and love is stubborn, and nothing we do can stop it from trying to find its way. On the anniversary of that fair night, Emily and I went to the lot by the river. There is no fair there anymore. The city put in a dog park and a paved path. We walked the path slow. We stood where the Ferris wheel would have been. I put my hands on the rail and looked up at nothing and tried to feel the way the air felt that night, the warm press of it, the way the lights made halos. Emily took the Polaroid out of her pocket and held it up to where the wheel would have cut the sky. We stood there until the sun went behind the football stadium and the insects started to sing. On the way back to the truck, she slid her arm through mine and said, "You looked. It was the perfect thing to say." That is the story I needed to tell you, friends. The one that explains why I named this channel the way I did and why I am thinking about changing it. If you listened all the way to this part, you know I mean it when I say you are part of my table. You matter. 96% of you are not subscribed, and I joke about it, but it stings. It truly does, so subscribe, would you? Like the video. Leave a comment and tell me the lie you want to stop obeying, or tell me where you were when you realized you had more room in your heart than you thought. I will be in the comments like always, with my coffee, answering until the battery runs out. I am Hank Mercer. I loved Linda. I loved June. I love Emily. I will be here next week if the good Lord and the weather allow it. Be kind to yourself today. Be brave enough to knock on the door. Grandfather's name, Hank Mercer.